I started my night shifts at Hawthorne Middle School 5 years ago, thinking it would be simple, uneventful work. I was hired as a night janitor, mostly responsible for cleaning classrooms, hallways, and common areas after school hours. At first, it was almost peaceful, quiet, predictable, and I liked being left alone. But there was one place I quickly learned to fear: the library. By day, it was warm and welcoming. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, dust motes dancing above rows of books. By night, though, it was a different place entirely. It felt alive. The shelves seemed taller, the shadows deeper, and the silence oppressive. I never liked being alone in there, but my job required it. I first started noticing odd things within my first month. Small things: books slightly out of order, chairs not quite where I left them, the faintest rustle of pages when no one else was there. I chalked it up to my imagination or the old building settling. Hawthorne had been built in the 1960s, with wooden floors that creaked and air vents that groaned. Still, there was something about the library that didn't sit right. Most nights I would start in the classrooms, mop the floors, empty trash cans, wipe desks. Then I would move to the cafeteria, the gym, and finally the library. The library was always last. I dreaded it, but I liked finishing there because the rest of the school felt empty and ordinary once the lights were off. That night started like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed my cleaning cart, and went down the main hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered as I passed, casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. By the time I reached the library door, it was 1:30 a.m. I paused outside, gripping the doorknob, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the faint smell of old books and varnished wood met me. The large space seemed even bigger at night. Rows of shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, and the small reading tables scattered throughout the room looked lonely and cold. I flicked on the lights. Most of them buzzed faintly, throwing half the room into shadow. I sighed, trying to shake off the unease. "Just books and dust," I muttered. I started my usual sweep, picking up trash, straightening chairs, wiping tables. That's when I noticed it. A book on the floor, spine cracked and pages slightly bent as if it had just fallen. I bent down to pick it up, brushing off the dust. I remembered straightening that exact shelf an hour earlier. My stomach tightened. I placed the book back carefully, but when I glanced down again, it was on the floor. I froze. "No," I whispered. The lights flickered. The shadows from the tall shelves stretched unnaturally across the room, pooling in the corners. My heart began to race. I tried to rationalize. Maybe the air vent had blown it off the shelf. Maybe a rat. Maybe I just misremembered. I took a deep breath and moved on, telling myself not to think about it. A few minutes later, I was straightening chairs at one of the reading tables near the back. The fluorescent hum was the only sound. Then I heard it, the faintest whisper. I stopped, holding my breath. "Hello." It was so quiet I thought I might have imagined it. My mind immediately jumped to the back of the library near the stacks of older books. I strained my ears. "Hello." Again, a whisper. Louder this time, deliberate. I froze. There should be no one in the library. I knew the building was locked, that every other janitor had the same schedule, and that no student would be here. I flicked my flashlight toward the back rows. Nothing. Just shelves, tall and unmoving. The whisper stopped. I told myself it was a draft, maybe the HVAC system. I tried to ignore it and continued cleaning. But the air felt heavy, like something was pressing down around me. As I moved down one of the narrow aisles, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow. Longer than it should have been, stretching along the floor between the shelves. I swung the flashlight toward it. Nothing. The aisle was empty. I took another step. The shadow moved. Not naturally, more like it shifted almost. Watching me, I froze again, heart pounding, flashlight shaking in my hand. The shadows between the shelves deepened, forming shapes that shouldn't exist, and then I heard it. A soft, dragging sound. Something moving slowly behind the shelves, scraping along the floor. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the towering rows. No answer. I backed toward the center of the library, trying to keep my flashlight trained ahead. That's when it happened. Books began falling off the shelves. Not just a single book or a shelf tipping slightly. Whole sections, spines cracking, pages rustling, falling like rain onto the carpet. I ducked as a heavy tome hit the floor beside my feet. My breath came in ragged gasps. I ran to the main aisle thinking maybe a structural problem caused it, but the shelves were perfectly upright. Nothing had been disturbed except the books themselves, and from the back near the stacks I heard it again. A whisper. My name. I turned, flashlight trembling. Down the far aisle I saw it, a figure, tall, thin, hunched slightly, dark, featureless, and moving, not walking, gliding. I froze. My throat went dry. I knew I should run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure stopped, and then slowly it raised its hand, not like a normal wave, more like a beckoning. I stumbled backward, tripping over a chair. My flashlight clattered to the floor, beam spinning wildly across the shelves. When I finally bent down and picked it up, the figure was gone, just empty shelves, but I knew it hadn't left. I tried to rationalize, breathing heavily. Old building, stress, lack of sleep. I muttered. I went to check the clock, something I did every night. But when I glanced at the wall near the librarian's desk, the clock read 5:47. Not possible. I had started at 10 p.m. Only 3 hours had passed. I shook my head and moved to leave. That's when I realized the library wasn't the same. The aisles were longer. The shelves stretched farther than I remembered. I tried to count rows, 12, 13, 14, but the room seemed to stretch endlessly. My stomach twisted. The exit door, the one I had unlocked to come in, wasn't where it should have been. I was trapped. The whisper came again, louder, insistent. Come here. I spun around. The figure from before stood at the end of the central aisle now. Featureless, black, impossibly thin. The shadows around it moved with it, creeping along the floor and walls. Please, the whisper repeated, this time unmistakable. My own voice distorted, echoing in the library. I bolted down the nearest aisle, hoping to reach the exit. But every turn led me back into the same endless rows. The ceiling seemed higher, the floor darker, the air heavier. I don't know how long I ran, pushing tables, knocking over chairs, screaming for help. The figure glided after me silently, always just at the edge of my vision. Finally, I found the librarian's desk. I slammed my hands onto it, praying it would lead somewhere, anywhere. The drawers opened on their own, revealing stacks of old student records and yellowed papers. One sheet fluttered up and landed on my face. I wiped it away. The figure stood in the center of the library now. Watching me, I grabbed a chair and swung it. The chair passed right through it, like smoke, and then I felt it, cold, like ice seeping into my bones. Not on my skin, but under it. The shadows whispered around me, pressing in. I screamed. I don't know how I made it out. I ran blindly, finally finding a door that led to the hallways. The library behind me seemed smaller, normal, empty, silent. I collapsed outside in the hallway, sweating, heart hammering. I didn't go back that night. Or the next. Weeks later, I returned with another janitor. We checked the library, light after light, row after row. Everything was normal. Nothing out of place. No shadows. No endless aisles. Just books. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Even now, years later, I avoid libraries at night. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can see the rows stretching endlessly, hear the whispers, soft but insistent, calling my name, beckoning me back, and I know, if I ever go back, I might not come out, because the library doesn't sleep, and neither does it forget. I never thought the cafeteria could be terrifying. After all, by day, it's just a room filled with tables, chairs, and the smell of peanut butter sandwiches. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, and the clatter of trays and chatter of kids fills every corner. But at night, when the kitchen is cold and the oven's long since turned off, the cafeteria transforms into something else entirely. My first shift there was routine enough. I had just finished cleaning classrooms on the second floor and was moving down toward the gym and cafeteria. My mop bucket squeaked as I rolled it down the hall, and the air had that familiar mix of disinfectant and dust. I reached the cafeteria door at 11:45 p.m., the last bell of sanity ringing in my mind. I had cleaned this place countless times, yet a knot of unease always formed in my stomach before stepping inside. I pushed the heavy double doors open. The large space was empty. Long tables with attached benches stretched in neat rows, reflecting the dim overhead lights. The kitchen beyond the sliding doors was dark, silent except for the low hum of the refrigerators. I flipped on the lights. Buzz. Flicker. Buzz. Shadows leapt from the corners, clinging to the walls and pillars. I set to work, mopping the floor in long, methodical strokes. The sound of water scraping the tile echoed strangely in the vast space, too loud, too hollow. About 20 minutes into the job, I thought I heard a whisper. "Hey." I froze, mop midair. I knew I was alone. The kitchen staff had left hours ago. The other janitors had gone home. The school was locked. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice weak and shaking. Silence. I shook my head, muttering, "It's nothing. Just stress," but then I heard it again. "Come. Here." It was soft, insistent, almost a hiss. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight in hand, scanning the room. Nothing. The benches were empty. The tables untouched. No sign of movement. I approached one of the long tables, flashlight beam sweeping across the empty benches. My eyes caught something unusual. A chair had been pulled out from the table. Not just slightly, it was almost in the middle of the aisle, facing away from the kitchen. I cursed under my breath. I could have sworn I had lined all the chairs up before. I bent down to push it back into place, but as I touched it, the chair slid out again, smoothly, almost deliberately. Heart pounding, I took a step back. "No, it's just gravity," I whispered to myself, but the floor was level. The chair was moving on its own. I stepped back and scanned the room. That's when I noticed something worse. The whispers weren't coming from one place. They were all around me, faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably multiple voices. Each table seemed to have its own soft murmur, a low hissing, calling my name, urging me to go somewhere I didn't want to go. "Stop, please," I said aloud. I tried to focus on cleaning, tried to ignore it, but every swipe of the mop felt heavier. Every reflection in the stainless steel counters and windows seemed distorted. Shadows danced where there shouldn't have been any. And then I saw them. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement by the stage at the far end of the cafeteria. A line of figures standing perfectly still behind the curtain that concealed the small platform used for school assemblies. I froze, flashlight shaking. The curtain shifted slightly, though there was no breeze. The figures were human-like but dark, blurred around the edges as though the shadows themselves had taken form. I blinked. They vanished. No, they were still there, just barely visible. Watching, waiting. The whispers grew louder, overlapping now, incoherent, yet somehow understandable. "Come here." "Come closer?" I tried to leave. The double doors to the hallway were only 20 feet away. I ran toward them, heart hammering, only to find the doors locked. Not physically, but locked. They wouldn't budge. I pushed harder. Nothing. Behind me, the whispers turned into laughter. Low guttural, echoing off the walls. I spun around. The cafeteria was empty, or at least it appeared so. But the chairs were moving again, sliding across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. Tables rocked slightly, creating a rhythm, a cadence that matched the laughter. I noticed the lights flickering in a strange pattern. Not random, but deliberate. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2. Flicker. Each sequence punctuated by the whispers, the laughter, the dragging sound of chairs. And then I heard it from above. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, pacing along the ceiling beams. Impossible, but unmistakable. The echo traveled directly over my head, coming closer, circling, stopping, then moving again. I ducked instinctively, but the shadows seemed to lean down toward me, stretching, curling, reaching. I felt it next. A cold pressure in the room, freezing the air around me. My breath came out in clouds. Frost formed along the edges of the tables, creeping silently toward the center aisle. My flashlight beam flickered wildly, struggling against the darkness. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were voices chanting, a low monotone surrounding me. I could feel it in my chest, my skull, as if the air itself were speaking through me. I stumbled toward the stage. The curtain lifted slightly on its own. Behind it, nothing. But the shadows poured from the folds like smoke, wrapping around my legs. I screamed, trying to pull free. My flashlight fell, rolling across the floor, beam catching the stage steps. That's when I saw them. Hundreds of black shapes crawling from under the stage like spilled ink, swarming toward me. I ran blindly, knocking over chairs and tables. The whispers followed me, now loud, screaming, yelling my name in unison. I reached the kitchen sliding door, slammed my shoulder into it, and it finally gave way. Cold night air hit me like a wall. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping. Behind me, the cafeteria looked normal again. No shadows, no figures, no moving chairs, just the faint hum of the refrigerator. I didn't return for a week. When I did, another janitor accompanied me. Nothing happened. No whispers, no shadows. The cafeteria was normal. Months later, I worked another overnight shift alone. The memory of that night never left me. I walked past the cafeteria carefully, trying not to look. But curiosity, or something worse, pulled me in. I stepped inside. Everything looked fine. The tables aligned. The chairs still. But the air felt heavy, cold, wrong, and I heard it again. Faint whispers coming from every corner of the room, chanting my name. I ran. I quit shortly after. I can still hear it sometimes. The whispers in empty cafeterias, the dragging of chairs across tiles that are supposed to be clean, the laughter echoing off walls long abandoned. Some nights I dream of the cafeteria, filled with shadows stretching endlessly, the voices calling, relentless, patient, waiting for me to return, and I know deep down, one day I might, because the cafeteria never sleeps. I always hated the science lab at Hawthorne Middle School. Not the chemistry or the biology, not the glass beakers or the Bunsen burners. I hated the lab itself. By day, it was a place of experiments and curiosity, of students in lab coats dropping ice cubes into vinegar or trying to light Bunsen burners without supervision. Bright, noisy, and full of life. At night, though, the lab was different. Shadows pooled in the corners. The smell of chemicals hung heavier in the air, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with an unnatural rhythm. There was a coldness there that wasn't just temperature. It was as if the air itself resented your presence. I started my night shift like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed my janitor cart, and made my rounds. Classrooms were routine, the gym easy, hallways silent except for my footsteps. But the science lab was always last. I arrived around 1:15 a.m. The hallway leading to the lab smelled faintly of ammonia, bleach, and something else I couldn't place. I paused at the door, gripping the handle. Even after years of cleaning, I dreaded this room. I pushed open the door. It creaked like a wounded animal. The room was large, filled with long tables, lab equipment, and shelves of chemicals and glass bottles. The lights flickered, and I felt the familiar prickling on the back of my neck. I started my routine, sweep the floor, wipe the counters, empty trash cans. But the room felt wrong. The shadows between tables seemed deeper, stretching further than they should have. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, anything there, but the lab was empty. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound. I froze. The sound came from the far side of the room, near the fume hoods and storage cabinets. I shone my flashlight toward it. Nothing, just the rows of glassware, beakers, and Bunsen burners covered in dust. I told myself it was a rat, or maybe a piece of equipment settling, but the scraping continued, moving closer. And then a shadow flickered across the wall, a human silhouette, but taller, thinner than any student or teacher I'd ever seen. I spun, flashlight shaking, but the room was empty. My heart raced. I bent down to pick up a fallen test tube. That's when I heard it, a whisper. Low, deliberate, and impossibly close. Over here. My blood ran cold. I stood up, scanning the lab, flashlight slicing through the darkness. No one, just shadows. Who's there? I called out. My voice sounded tiny, swallowed by the vastness of the room. A soft laugh replied, echoing, mocking. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I tried to rationalize. Maybe the air vent had blown something off a shelf. Maybe it was just fatigue. But then I saw it. Beakers. Shaking. Not on the shelves, but on the counters. Trembling as if something unseen was holding them. I reached to steady one. It slammed back onto the counter with enough force to shatter. Glass shards scattered across the floor. My flashlight beam danced wildly, catching the reflections in the other glassware. Hundreds of tiny sparks of light moving unnaturally. The whisper grew louder. My name. Repeated over and over, I backed toward the door, planning to escape. But the lab wasn't the same. The tables were further apart, longer than they should be. Shelves stretched endlessly into darkness. The ceiling seemed higher. I tried to measure with my eyes, but the room kept expanding, folding onto itself, and in the center of the lab, I saw them, figures, multiple, featureless, black, thin as shadows surrounding the far counter. They didn't move, but I could feel their gaze, pressing, watching, judging. A sudden noise made me spin. A beaker tipped over on its own, spilling a strange green liquid. It hissed as it touched the floor. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief darkness I thought I saw one of the figures lean closer, as if studying me. I stumbled back, tripping over a chair. My head hit the edge of a counter. Stars exploded in my vision, but when I looked up they were closer. Somehow they had glided across the room, silent as smoke. The whispering was now a chant, low rhythmic, my name over and over until it became unbearable. I covered my ears, but the sound penetrated my skull, vibrating through my bones. Then I felt it. A cold pressure on my shoulder. Not ice, not wind, something heavier. Something solid. I spun, nothing, and yet I knew it had touched me. I stumbled, breath coming in shallow gasps. The shadows around the lab seemed to swell, pulsing, alive. The figures moved slightly, leaning, stretching. Always toward me, always just out of reach. I glanced up. The fluorescent lights flickered in a strange sequence. Not random, deliberate. 1, 2, pause, 3. Each flicker accompanied by movement in the shadows above. Figures crouched on the ceiling beams, long limbs dangling, featureless faces staring down. I ran, tried to reach the door, but the lab kept stretching, the tables never ending. Every corner I turned led me back to the center, where the shadows waited. I slammed against a glass table. It didn't break, but the surface rippled like water. My reflection, my face appeared twisted, darker, eyes hollow. Behind me, the shadows moved in the reflection, but the room behind me was empty. I swung the flashlight around. Nothing, just the lab. Just the beakers and tables. Just the endless shelves stretching into blackness. I knew I had to escape. I ran toward the far corner, thinking maybe there was an emergency exit. The shadows followed, converging silently, closing in. My name repeated in every whisper, echoing, overlapping, urgent, pleading. I grabbed a chair, swinging it blindly. It passed through the nearest figure, smoke, darkness, nothing solid. I screamed, heart pounding, lungs burning. Finally, I spotted the door, the one I had unlocked hours earlier. I lunged, shoulder into it. It swung open. Cold night air rushed in, relief, freedom. I collapsed in the hallway, gasping, drenched in sweat. Behind me, the lab looked normal, silent, empty. I never returned alone. When I went back with another janitor, nothing happened. No whispers, no shadows, just an ordinary science lab smelling faintly of chemicals. But I know what I experienced was real. Every night since, I dream of the lab. Endless tables, rippling glass, shadows moving just beyond my vision. I hear my name whispered, insistent, patient. I never worked the science lab again. I quit my overnight shifts entirely. But sometimes when the lights flicker or a shadow moves in an empty room, I remember. And I know the lab is still waiting. For me. For anyone who dares enter when it sleeps.